It now gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the most popular professors and speakers ever to grace a lectern. He is renowned for his teaching prowess, his TED Talk, his best-selling books, and of course, for his deep insight on the challenges facing society. Please welcome the incomparable Larry Smith.
Thank you very much, Mary. It is certainly my pleasure to join you at this reunion. I wished we were able to do it in person, but that's not possible safely. So this is an event that I still will enjoy, and I want to, again, express my pleasure at being here. I look forward to an opportunity, though, when we can do this in person. So, I get to talk about my favorite subject. I get to talk about the economy, which is endlessly fascinating to me, always changing, and of course occasionally apocalyptic as it is during these moments. Well, it really gives me great satisfaction to be able to bring some positive news, because I can't always do that if I'm going to do it legitimately. One of the things I can start to tell you is, assuming there is no variant that is so peculiar it overrides the vaccination rates, so long as the vaccination rates continue at their current pace, which for now is actually really one of the best in the world. So long as we can maintain this, we're going to have a revival of economic activity, and the recession will come to a relatively quick close. And that is really positive news. Let's understand why we expect a sharp snapback in economic activity, in fact, faster than would normally occur as we move out of recessions. Recessions in the past, and this is the fifth one I've now taught through, these recessions in the past typically involve some kind of financial marketplace, either fiasco or actual direct action by the Bank of Canada. And frequently for the public, this makes them uneasy, makes them concerned that they don't understand what's happening. So economic activity tends to revive slowly as people's confidence comes back. This is different. People understand why there's economic adversity. They understand why people have been rendered unemployed in restaurants because we can't actually go there. This means people understand that as the vaccination rate continues, and as we can go back to some semblance of normal, that in fact there's no reason not to spend money. And so the confidence that underlies all economic activity, both that of investors and consumers, is in relatively good shape. So we're really pleased that is the circumstance. It's one of these little bonus things that we actually take advantage of. The other element that is really important is, while there was a significant hit in employment levels fell in particularly among many people whose incomes weren't very good to begin with. In service sector jobs not normally offering high salaries. This disadvantaged a number of our most vulnerable citizens. This is unhelpful to say the least, except of course we must also notice truthfully that the majority of the population continued to work. We worked from home, and we actually earned incomes. And we had a real challenge for those of us who are still working, earning incomes. What can we do with this money? So, since we have preached that people should save more money, we actually did save more money. The savings rate pre-pandemic was running at about 2%. It's now approximately 13%. Working Canadians poured vast amounts of money into their savings accounts. If there was ever a case of pent-up consumer demand, it's now. People want to spend money. They want to go back to the restaurants. They want to travel. They want to do a whole bunch of things that they have not otherwise done before. They want to get properly barbered, which, as you can plainly see, I am not. So we are going to spend money. We have the money to spend. The employment levels, as I say, are still relatively high. So there's going to be a rapid acceleration of economic activity as the vaccinations continue as we move through the year. That is really clear. There is no argument. That's virtually a consensus argument of most economists to expect a sharp resumption of economic activity. Right now, we're about 2% below our previous high. So we've got to gain back that 2%. That is expected to occur over the next year. So that's all good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all good stuff, but you know the buts are coming now. Now, of course, a sharp acceleration of consumer activity and spending, that's good. rising employment, especially among the service sector workers that have been in closed industries, that's going to rise sharply. All of this is really good stuff. And then, of course, is the interesting question. What is going to happen to inflation? Remember inflation? I know some of the people in this event. They are not young people, so they actually remember that there was something once upon a time called inflation. A big chunk of my career, inflation was a continuous, controversial, important theme because it was so prevalent and because it was very high and it was socially and economically disadvantageous. Now, for about the past decade, inflation was low and stable. So basically, inflation went away. And it didn't occur even though there was a dramatic expansion of the money supply in 08-09 to deal with that particular fiasco. And notwithstanding the fact that interest rates are very, very low, and they're low for very good reasons, which we'll talk about in a moment, is there going to be a spike up of inflation? Well, let's see. A lot of savings, a lot of pent-up demand, bottlenecks already in the supply chains. So we already see disruptions in the supply chains which have caused, among other things, commodity prices to rise sharply. And some of those commodity prices also rising sharply in anticipation of the surge in demand. This means, for example, Canada's exports by value are actually in really relatively healthy shape as commodity prices have strengthened, including for lumber, for anyone who, in a renovation frenzy, bought every piece of available wood in the country. There's like no wood available. So if you've got wood, hold on to it, because someone is about to steal it if you're not careful. Like really and truly, to make wood this precious ingredient is really a quite interesting circumstance. But that is that a harbinger of a general increase in inflation? The answer is almost certainly yes. The Bank of Canada, for example, which obsesses about these issues, has already acknowledged that they're likely to overshoot their target. The long-established target for inflation in Canada is stripped out of its volatile measurements, including, among other things, energy, is between 1% and 3%. And the bank effectively drives it around 2%. 2% they're happy with, 2% per year inflation. Now, they expect, in fact, it to increase as an almost inevitable circumstance of this sharp and relatively sudden increase in economic activity. So to hit 2 and 2, it could actually hit the top of the boundary, which is 3%. It might even go over 3%. The bank has been fairly clear that they will not immediately react to what they assume is going to be a temporary increase in the rate of inflation. So if it is a temporary increase in inflation, the Bank of Canada said it will not engage in particular policy actions. So basically it's telling you that it expects the increase in inflation to be temporary, they will tolerate it, and interest rates will remain relatively low. That, of course, had an if in it, did it not? If it remains stable, if it is a temporary spike up in inflation. But what if 1 year from now, inflation is running consistently over 3% here and possibly elsewhere, since similar conditions exist in the United States for something in similar direction? Oh, well, interest rates might start rising significantly. And the bank has been very clear. It has reminded you, in case you've forgotten, and if you're a former student of mine, you shouldn't have forgotten, because you should know this already. He said, I couldn't resist saying that, ladies and gentlemen. I just had to say that. Sometimes the old professor wants to say, I told you so. I told you that the Bank of Canada has the tools to contain inflation. I told you that in 81. I told you that in 91. I told you that in 2001, and I will tell you that yet again. And the bank's been very clear. It said, and by the way, if inflation if it's more than that temporary spike up, we have the tools to rein it in. And you know perfectly well what those tools are: to increase interest rates. So what are the odds of that happening? Well, we don't know, because we're in an unprecedented situation, but the tools are available. And I would remind you, in case you've also forgotten, the Bank of Canada is not an agency of the Government of Canada, and therefore has not, under the modern legislation which is in place, has never been given an instruction by the Government of Canada. So in fact, this is in many ways a non-political decision. It's a technical decision. So that raises the likelihood, or the possibility, that should it be necessary, it will happen. Now, since it's impossible actually to tell you the odds of it happening or not, most of the consensus is not likely, that the inflation is going to abate quickly as the supply chains pick up speed again. This is always assuming no disruption in the supply chains caused by a resurgence of the virus in the major manufacturing countries of the world. So assuming all that, which is assumed, so unless there are some biological scares coming, that inflation is probably temporary. But it does bring us to this topic of the potential course of interest rates, which remain at this moment at 400-year lows. That forecast I just gave you about a rapid snapback in economic activity assumes also two other things besides the vaccinations are working. It assumes no giant bust up in the financial markets and no bust up in the real estate markets. So, what is the course of the possibilities involving the stock market and the real estate market? Come on, ladies and gentlemen, don't try to fool the old guy. This is what you really want to know about. You want to know about whether your house value is at risk. You want to know if you're young and don't have a house yet, if there's a prayer of you ever owning your own home. And if you're an older person and has a registered retirement savings plan, you also wonder about those plans which include large amounts of Canadian and international equities, whether your retirement is at risk. Now, of course, all those wonderful spending plans that you have, all those restaurants, all those trips, all that stuff you think you want to take, and I want to take. I have a four-wheeler ATV side-by-side sitting in the yard waiting for me to get home to use it. So yes, I bought a toy. I bought an expensive toy because I also had savings and didn't know what to do with it. So thought I would buy myself a toy to drive around in the forest. And I can't wait to use it, and it's just new and I haven't used it yet. But what will derail those plans? Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, you suddenly thinking your house is at risk. You suddenly thinking, my goodness, I have a mortgage which is higher than today's value of my house. You will do what you have done in the past when such odd circumstances occur. You dramatically reduce all other forms of spending. So now we have to pause for a moment and answer one really interesting question. Is the real estate market a big bubble? And is the stock market a really big bubble? Stock markets have come back slightly, but they're still very high by historic standards. And they have risen through most of the pandemic. There was a little bump and then they kept rising. They've been rising for a long period of time. Stock prices are relatively high historically. And house prices, well, really, shall we talk about house prices? That leap 10, 20, 30, depends which marketplace you're in, 10, 20, 30% per year. Now, first thing we're going to say about the housing market, because we need to talk about that in more detail, because a bust up there will derail this forecast. A bust up there, excuse me. First, we're trying to bust up not the fact that those price increases have to slow. It's mathematically impossible. By the way, you can't have house prices rise 20% per year, per year, per year. Your engineers do the math. You know that's bizarre. And so the only question is, when is it going to plateau and do something that is mathematically not impossible? And if it plateaus, will it just go steady? That will be okay. No, most people won't freak out if that's happening. But on the other hand, what if it pulls back? Oh, 1 or 2%. I think people will be calm with that. And more, and more. Now, notice a few things about what's the odds of that happening? What's the likelihood of that happening? Well, partly, it's important to notice that while the prices have risen at extraordinary rates, part of that increase is actually very easy to understand. Bubbles tend to occur for mysterious reasons. We'll get to the stock market and Robin Hood in a moment, so just let's do things in order, ladies. I know how you in class used to leap to new topics before we finish the one we're on. Let's deal with the real estate market before we worry about the craziness in the stock markets. In the real estate market, much of that's driven by real reasons. So, for example, Employment levels in this country are some of the highest in the world. When people get jobs, they tend to want houses. Much of the employment in this country is still relatively well paid, and consistent with, of course, interest rates being so low, it was in fact possible for large numbers of people to want to buy homes. So there was a real driver of demand. Yes, right now there's a significant amount of speculative investment where people are buying condos, for example, and houses and renting them and proposing to flip them. Well, the point is, of course, they're still able to rent them because there's someone who also needs accommodation. We have a relatively rapid increase in our population because of the fact that we have, although being disrupted by the pandemic, a significant inflow of immigration. So the number of people working rises sharply. The number of people coming into the country has risen historically at reasonably good rates. This means that the demand for housing is relatively strong, like real people with real jobs wanting to buy real houses. So that's fine. The other element of what's driven those prices up is that's a real increase in demand, but increasing the supply of housing is not easy to do. Housing is, by definition, something that responds more slowly to changes in demand. It's affected by public policies, it's affected by municipal governments, it's affected by a whole range of considerations. Now, some of those considerations are totally valid. Let us not destroy the environment by building houses every place under the sun. On the other hand, some of them may be driven by artificial barriers, which are slowing down, for example, in the innovation in the construction industry for housing, which would be unhelpful. So there are a number of issues which cause the supply to grow much more slowly. And then it's economics 101. If the demand is rising sharply and supply is rising slowly, then you are going to have this price spike up. There's another element that is adding to this aggravation of the increase in the housing prices, and that, of course, is the fact that the population is concentrating itself in a very, very small part of this. We're a massive country, but for some bizarre reason, we all decide we have to live on top of each other. So much of the employment is occurring in, depends on how you want to count an urban jurisdiction, in 3 to 4 single jurisdictions in the country. Happen to be spread around the country, but doesn't change the fact that if there's a surge of employment, for example, in Vancouver, Vancouver in the area, that, by the way, is a hard place to find appropriate land for housing for a very bunch of good reasons, as you know perfectly well. An abnormal proportion of jobs are created in a very, very few number of cities in a very, very concentrated area. So naturally, that's also driven up the price of housing abnormally. But those are real circumstances, and they're not about to abate quickly. Certainly, working remotely from home has caused people to leave, for example, some of these urban areas and seek more affordable housing in communities elsewhere. And that, of course, has driven up housing prices more generally. And of course, the Waterloo region, if we just talk about this particular community, whose housing prices are up 20 to 30%, depending which benchmark you're using, the employment growth rates have been very strong. We have significant employment creation from both established companies and the new entrepreneurial companies that Mary referred to. So in fact, that's again valid market. Most of those houses are occupied, and most of the condos are occupied by owners or renters. So long as the underlying dynamic remains that strong, then that's a good thing. What would destabilize this, of course, is back to inflation. If the inflation was sustained a year from now and interest rates rise, for some people who are carrying large mortgages, that may spook them. For people who are the wheelers, the dealers, and the flippers, of which there's a considerable number out there, they're powerfully vulnerable to that increase in interest rates. So that potential increase in interest rates, driven by a spike up in inflation, is the one thing that could bring the housing market at least very quickly to a plateau and possibly cause it to abate somewhat. So there is a significant risk, but it all comes back down to inflation. Isn't it so, I mean, it's so cool how it all fits together. Like, I love this stuff. I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm getting so excited by the fact that there's all this doom and gloom and so many people have lost their jobs, and I'm not. But intellectually, this is fascinating to see how these pieces come together. Whatever is going on, ladies and gentlemen, it is not out of control. It is not impossible to understand. So whatever you want to think about your economy, do not suddenly believe it is so complicated you can't understand it, or it's a bunch of random noise. It's neither of those two things. You can advantage yourself by planning carefully, mindful of the fact that you've got to deal with contingencies. You live in a world that is about contingencies, and if you want to live in an entirely predictable world, my goodness, you want to live in a world with no technology, which would be an odd thing for an engineer to think he or she wanted to do. Never mind anybody else. So we're going to have to live with these levels of uncertainty. We've got to plan for those levels of uncertainty. And the real estate market has these dimensions, which is fairly clear, driven by interest rates. And then we come to the stock market. Haven't forgotten about the stock market. Those of you, yes, ladies and gentlemen, here I'm trying to be calm. You know, it was always a struggle for me to stay calm while I'm talking about the economy. And when you do dopey things, it makes me even more difficult to stay calm. There is something about technically literate people, especially when they are technically literate with respect to information technology, that seems to make you prey to anything that is really technical, really cool tech, to make you think it must thrive. It must thrive. Like, mustn't it? I mean, isn't it the case that cool is the greatest compliment that you can pay to anybody? To any company, and to any product, anything? I'm a student of language, by the way. I happen to like language. Cool is one of those youth-oriented words which has not changed in almost 75 years. Cool means today what it meant when I was an undergraduate in this institution. It's likely to mean the same thing 50 years forward. It's one of these odd words. Most of the other, idiosyncratic words, slang of my childhood now are either unintelligible to you or might be rude, but not cool. The only trouble is, ladies and gentlemen, please explain to me how cool is the same thing as a profitable, worthy investment which has understandable risk. For though you know what I'm, now see, if you were in this room, I could see your faces and I would know you've got this look on your face. Yes, you, I'm talking to you who hold Bitcoins, you who hold, and Bitcoin, I mean, some of you, of course, believe Bitcoin is like so stupid because Ethereum is the true religion. It's the cryptocurrency that will rule them all. See, my goodness, even the camera technician thinks, yes, okay, well, wait till I finish talking about cryptocurrencies. Ladies and gentlemen, can you make money with cryptocurrency? Of course you can. Of course you can. You can make money buying and selling gold. You can make money buying speculative investments. You can make money buying and selling vague claims to images auctioned off by Christie's. Punk art indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I know about this stuff. And in your hearts, you know too. In your hearts, you know, it is a royally speculative investment. And cryptocurrency is valuable because large numbers of people think it's valuable for the same reason gold is valuable. And of course, because something is valued solely between your ears, driven by no objective reality whatsoever, you know perfectly well that that can change. It is why Bitcoin and its equivalents are so volatile. Now, I would like to think, if it was just the cryptocurrencies that were in fantasy land, I'd like to think that. But it's not. By the way, for those of you who think, well, yeah, but cryptocurrencies are going to finally become real currencies and drive out nasty government-issued money. Really? Well, in the first place, by the way, notice the government can simply prohibit all this activity. Please notice that China has already been making noises that it is about to do so. But more to the point is, yes, cryptocurrencies, yes, it's quite true, cryptocurrencies could become currency. And they are actually becoming currency. So then that means they're real. If they're becoming currency, then that's a real economic function, and therefore they might have value. And you know perfectly well who's using them. While you invest in cryptocurrency, you are facilitating organized crime, ransomware, and the hacker world. Now, if you really believe the governments of the world will not take any action concerning the primary payment mechanism for organized crime, and in particular for the hacker ransomware, which is bedeviling us at this moment, if you really believe that governments will not take action to reduce the ability of criminals to launder their illegal proceeds, oh my goodness. You're alumni. You are mature men and women. That would fall under the category of naive. Please don't be naive about the power of the state. There are already elaborate mechanisms to prevent money, real money, from being used for criminal activity. Would you really suppose that anyone let cryptocurrencies serve that function? And there are a number of tools that they could use to prevent it. So, warning, warning. Danger, danger. Speculate if you wish. And if you've made some money, and you might have, do what all good poker players do. Take some of your earnings, take them out of the game fast, because if you aren't taking them out of the game fast and putting them into something real, your $7.2 million worth of cryptocurrency that you have at this moment could become zero, like literally zero. Now, I would like to tell you that the stock market itself is not like that. I mean, stocks and real companies. That's not the same thing as cryptocurrency. So, okay, fine. Cryptocurrency, you've got your retirement funds in cryptocurrency. I despair. And most of you don't, thank goodness. But what about the stock market itself? At very, very high price, notice a few things. The stock market indexes are abnormally affected by a relatively small number of companies who've done spectacularly well. Some of them are real companies making real products and making them profitably. Google would be one. Amazon makes marginal profits, but it's sitting on its cloud unit, which is very profitable to it. Facebook's a real company, selling ads very profitably. That's real. But the evaluations of many companies bear no relationship to what it is they're actually doing. So some of the big ones I mentioned, okay, they're reasonable. And as soon as Amazon becomes a true monopoly, they of course will raise their prices, even though the government of the United States has the ability to prohibit that. So if you're buying Amazon to wait for it to be the full monopoly and pump up its prices, what if it can't? What if it can't? Small little complication in this party we're having while dancing on our RSP returns. Then notice the other thing. Notice the stocks, whose underlying reality bear no relationship to the price. I can think of an electric car company that comes to mind, making a handful of cars, even profitably. It's a handful of cars in the marketplace. And look at the numbers. You're men and women of numbers. That's why Mary reports numbers to you. You should be able to react to numbers. You should think, yeah, numbers are good. Well, I'll tell you numbers are good too. I'm an economist after all. What would you think I'm going to say? I'm going to tell you with respect to some of these companies, pray look at the numbers. You know when there's something strange going on. When children are trading stocks. Yes, they are. Teenagers. I'm sorry, those are children. We've got now children taking positions on stock prices. So BlackBerry has connections back to the University of Waterloo. So we pay attention to that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, BlackBerry's prices have been rising and falling at like ridiculous rates over the past week. Up 10%, down 10%. Nothing is materially happening at BlackBerry. It's not announcing products. It's not announcing bad news. It's not announcing good news. It's not announcing any news at all. Not because it's not active, but it is rebuilding itself. It's trying to develop a new marketplaces, which is all good stuff. But the volatility in the stock price now has absolutely nothing to do with the fact, except that it's attracted at commentary and social media. Now, for those of you who are men and women of numbers, pay attention to the social media. Is the social media actually giving you numbers? Oh, I have secret numbers about BlackBerry. No, they're just saying, BlackBerry cool. That's what they are saying. Now, they use a lot of synonyms for cool. Well, Half the words are cool and then the other half words are not cool. Like really and truly, ladies and gentlemen, does that sound like a sophisticated way to buy stocks? So unfortunately, there's a lot of noise in the stock market of all the amateurs, children, day traders, facilitated by, oh yes, facilitated by the technology you so love. Oh yes. Don't you in your heart of hearts feel slightly uneasy, just slightly uneasy, that people now whip out their phone to make important financial decisions on that teeny tiny screen where you can barely see what you're looking at? Not the environment that will offer numbers. With my old eyes, I can't see a list of table of numbers on my phone anyway. And I would like to think that a young person can actually see the numbers, but they don't actually look at the numbers anyways. They're on their phone reading a blog posting of you know the word, it's so cool, influencers. Influencers. I'm a university professor and I'm proud of it. I want you to be reading what experts tell you. You know, experts, people who've worked in a domain, people who have reputation and track record and experience trying to talk to you about stocks, investment opportunities, or other areas. And we'd like you to, you know, experts. But apparently you're influenced by people who are called influencers. It's a wonderful word because it's a true word. It's a true word. They influence your behavior for no apparent reason except they can do really great video. Warning, warning, danger, danger. The marketplaces, the financial market for equities, the stock markets, are at risk because of all of this bumping and grinding and noise and children and amateurs and day traders. So work the numbers. I'm not telling you not to invest. That's ridiculous. Of course you should. You should save and spend a little money and save and invest. Invest carefully. Invest in things you do homework for. Homework. Homework on a real screen where you can read things from experts, not amateurs. Make wise decisions. I'm going to say it. It's the word you don't like. You didn't like it when you were in these buildings. You don't like it now. Do your homework. Or in these tumultuous, dangerous times in which we live, failure to do homework will produce more than a failed course. It'll set you on fire. Don't do that, ladies and gentlemen. We have this opportunity of a resurging economic activity, and we need it. We need to bring those parts of our population which are economically struggling. We need to bring them forward. We need to include them in economic activity. We most certainly do. Initiative and diversity will not work if the economy is tanking. So we've got this positive momentum. We're getting the pandemic behind us, blessedly. Now's the time not to lose your wits. Now is not the time to think, must double down on hysterical investments with no value to them. Warning, 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 danger, danger, please do not do that. So my cautionary note is not because there's apocalypse. My cautionary note is you could damage yourselves by too critically adopting the modern way of doing things. You know what it is. At the risk of yet one more stupid techie acronym. Fear of missing out. I better get on my phone and buy something because I'll miss the opportunity. Goodness, listen to what that's saying. You sound like you're 12. That's not a good thing for adult persons, some of whom may be moving to the peak of their careers. Please don't do that. Now, we have to address one point, and I want to take a just brief look a little farther into the economy, and then I'm going to be happy to take questions. One thing I want to say is, please, while you are trying to understand these financial market issues, would you please at least not fall prey to some of the goofy mythology out there? You're supposed to know better. So, let's go through some of the things that could affect the financial markets that some of you may have, in a moment of weakness, been tempted to believe. One, Canada is not broke. Yes, your government spent a very large amount of money. Could it have spent a little less? Yes, possibly. Except when you're in the middle of a crisis, it's a little hard to not overdo it, because there's always the criticism that you underdid it. So you face a crisis. The economy's hit the rocks. It's a public health emergency. It's an economic emergency. Do what the textbooks say, spend money. Government spends money. Bank of Canada creates the money to facilitate it so interest rates don't rise. It is exactly out of the economic textbooks, and it's been used repeatedly. So don't suddenly then look at it, see a big number, and go goofy. You're supposed to understand numbers, not say, yo, there's a lot of digits, and somehow come to that as a realistic conclusion about something. Yes, it's a lot of digits. The truth is the Government of Canada's total debt position is not disproportionate to most of its neighbours. Its ability to service its debt is easily under control. The simple fact of the matter is, yes, they could, and I'm not justifying whether they spent it all wisely. They sent me some money. What on earth were they sending me money for? Because I have money. I don't need to have these little bonuses sent by the Government of Canada. So that was just generally goofy. But the truth is, fundamentally, they did what they were supposed to. They could have finessed it more, but again, sometimes in hindsight, that's how you do it. The current fiscal plan of the Government of Canada is credible. Now, they have to follow through. The spending is unsustainable, but they know that. Everyone knows that. So they propose not to sustain it as the emergency abates. As the emergency abates, the spending should abate. The debt levels are not disproportionately high. And so, if you do what you're supposed to do, let it abate. Oh, by the way, and then the other cliche, please, don't suddenly leap into this cliche that, oh yeah, well, you know, they're borrowing money and all the young people are going to have to pay it off. We haven't paid off World War II. Why on earth would we suddenly pay off the money we borrowed yesterday afternoon? We don't pay it off. We simply roll it over and the economy grows, and it's not an issue. Keep in mind that right now, big chunk of the government's debt's held by the Bank of Canada, and when it pays interest, it simply goes to the Bank of Canada, then comes back to the government in an accounting loop. So, get rid of that fantasy. Your government needs to restrain the spending. It is a plan to do so. You should hold it to that plan, because it's necessary that spending be restrained. And it may imply also some tax increases in the future. So if you think the debt is too high, then I presume you're in favor of those tax increases. So do make up your mind with respect to what you want. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel a little silly saying something which should be obvious to all of us who are thoughtful. I pray that's most of you. We need to make decisions carefully. We need to make them the old-fashioned way, calmly, not on our phones, with real data, not driven by goofy influencers. We do our homework. It's boring. It works. It finds you opportunities and keeps you from danger. We look to you not just to make wise decisions for yourselves and your families. We look to you to make decisions wise for your communities. We invite you to provide leadership. If you respond thoughtfully, the world needs leadership from educated, committed, experienced men and women, and that's you. Please rise to that challenge of providing community leadership. And for engineers in particular, and I know this is an event for engineers, but I would say this to any audience. I'm not catering to you. I would say it's also important to provide leadership in those decisions about technology. Most of the major social challenges facing us, including the pandemic, including the potential that further viruses are out there lurking. The answers are in science and technology, and you know that. Our ability to address climate change, which is a horrendous challenge facing us, a potential catastrophic and insidious threat to us all, it is not just going to be solved by recycling cans and driving a little less. It requires technological innovations involving renewable energy, storage, and carbon capture That's your domain. You want to put your investment dollars where they really will be put to good purpose? The weather, cryptocurrency, how about the things that will make better lives for you, your children, and your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren? We have a responsibility to the young. I spent a bunch of my time with the young. That's why I like talking to you to your mature alumni people. I'm older than you are, so I get to say old. You don't, by the way. Surrounded by young techies here. And don't you make old jokes. I can. You can't. But the point is, we are supposed to have the maturity to provide that leadership. We are supposed to care about the children and those yet to be born, and to rise to that responsibility. It's about leadership, informed leadership, and technology is, as it has been for so long, at the heart of this matter. I don't know whether I'm being optimistic or pessimistic. I'm trying to be practical, trying to be realistic. I have too much respect for you and this opportunity to speak with you to do anything other than tell you how I feel about these issues. I wish us all success in the challenging days that remain ahead of us when the pandemic is hopefully in history. The challenges merely morph. They have not gone away. I am, of course, tickled pink to answer questions. Again, or I'll start talking more and you'll all be sorry. So I'm happy to have questions. They're going to be...
So we have a question here. What's the future of the co-op program, or perhaps new grad jobs, when big high-tech companies are no longer in Canada? So perhaps touch on the brain drain, or the concern of the brain drain.
It's clearly an issue. We live in a world in which the most precious thing is talent, without a doubt, right? Talent is the key issue. We have not always done a good job in Canada of making sure that we can nurture growth. We can nurture startups. We have some trouble making sure that they can scale up in Canada. So it's a real challenge that needs to be addressed, and I will not deny that. The brain drain is abated slightly as the government of the United States, under its previous president, whose name I shall not speak, so great is his shame, and has driven some of the most talented people away. We do need to learn how better to nurture our startups, not into growth, not just to start them. So we're actually working on that. So that's an important issue. But I'd also say that one of the edges we have in this country, we're a small country, and as a small country we're vulnerable to large players mucking about, sometimes appropriately and sometimes we're collateral damage by accident. But I ask you to notice one interesting thing, that of all the democracies on the planet, a shrinking number by the way, but of all the mature democracies on this country, we're about to have an election probably within the next year. We are almost the only country that will have that election where immigration is not a contentious political issue. None of Canada's major political parties wish to restrict immigration. What they are arguing about is the number of immigrants. And the argument is, oh, that number's not too big. The argument is that number's too small, not that argument's too big. For the past 15 years, almost 20 years now, the vast majority of Canadians have said immigrants are a net positive contribution to the economy, which is why the politicians don't do anything other than say, yes, that's a good thing, because they can read the polls too. That's one of our most favorable circumstances. It is why the challenges that we've had serving our international students because of the travel restrictions and other concerns, is unhelpful doesn't change the fact that we are still one of the most welcoming societies to immigration. And that helps address the brain drain, because we've got a brain gain there. Now we need to hold on to them. Other questions?
So we have some questions coming in about the housing market.
Yes.
Do you think that the housing market is in a bubble? And what can city government do to improve the supply of housing?
Okay, first, the best I can say about the housing market is it is possibly a bubble in the sense, it's a bubble in the sense that it cannot keep rising at the same rate. So if you're buying a house expecting to, if you buy a house today and you expect it to actually appreciate over the next 10 years, that is certainly almost a wild speculation, is almost likely not to occur. If you've got a house from the past, you are likely to have some gains that will be realized. So it's, and I'm not trying to waffle, but it's bubble-like. Bubble implies that once the bubble is pricked, there'll be a guaranteed sharp reduction. Because those drivers we talked about are so fundamental, there's still a fundamental demand for housing and a fundamental problem with supply. So that while the prices can come down, I do not see them falling so sharply as to destabilize the housing market. For example, when mortgage rates went more than 10% in the early 80s, there were predictions of massive people losing their homes. They actually did not. What ended up happening was that people just paid down their mortgages, stopped spending money on other things, and we had a recession, but people stayed in their homes. I was actually talking to someone this afternoon, in fact, whose family was able to maneuver through that. So if they can maneuver, if people can maneuver through 10% mortgage rates, and that 10% is not coming back anytime in a realistic time frame, then bubble-like is the best way to describe it. There are a variety of things that municipal governments can do, by the way, to facilitate housing within their cities, to make sure that available land, including public land, is available for housing. It's also important to recognize that if you're going to have people living in concentrated areas, they have to live in high rises, and people have got to stop complaining about buildings which are too tall overlooking their single detached houses, because low density is a key issue. The other thing I would point out is the building code has to be altered so that we can move housing innovation, construction innovations into the system much more quickly. There's a whole range of construction innovations which could tangibly lower the price of accommodation of constructing it that are stuck in the pipeline. The challenge is, for example, something simple as what is called tall timber, which is laminated wood. Finally, the building code allows you to build a high-rise building with this version of lumber, which by all the scientific evidence is as safe as building it using other materials. And even then, a company in Toronto was going to build narrow, tall buildings out of wood and provide affordable price points. And he was told by the building inspectors that he had to have all the stairwells concrete, which defeats the whole purpose. You can't bring in concrete workers at all that expense and then build wood around it. Now, a great row occurred. And they finally decided that, yes, well, if the building itself was safe, then the stairwells could be made out of wood. But that you would actually have to, this slowed the developer down. And this happened within the last several years, by the way. So that's also one way, which is a provincial responsibility, by the way. Now, it would also help that building inspections, which are at the municipal level, would also be a little more accommodating than just dealing with detailed rules of the building code. As for those of you in my classroom before, you know when you ask me questions, I can't possibly do short answers. I'm sorry. New question?
So we have a question here on climate change.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on climate change to the current economic system, and what should be done right now?
Okay, climate change is an enormous challenge. Look, there are some things we do not understand about climate change. I mean, it's a science which is evolving, but I am not going to suddenly decide that I know more about climate change than the people who have been specialists in it. I like experts, and experts tell me that the environment is severely at risk, and approaching a tipping point beyond which we will struggle to mitigate the damage. So that would be my first observation. So let us be clear, it is something we all have to take seriously. It requires us all to make changes to our behavior, changes to what we buy, changes to how we respond to every manner of thing, how we design the buildings that we're in, how we design our own travel plans. So this is one of these cases where you need virtually every citizen to take positive action. We also need the state to do it. We also need large corporations to do it. It is somewhat encouraging that more and more investors are holding large organizations up to their environmental responsibilities, to say that they will not, for example, invest in companies which are just about extracting and using carbon without any carbon mitigation techniques. So what has to be done now is what's being done. It's like a full court press. You need to take all of these sensible initiatives and push them all forward and stop being content that you recycle your pop cans. One of the challenges is people get satisfied by doing some, simple things. I mean, it's a good simple thing. Well, you certainly should recycle aluminum, but it doesn't change the fact that that is not going to stop the polar ice caps from melting, because they're melting right now. Like, it is scary to me. I'm a tree hugger. My family has 15,000 trees, and we love every single one of them, except, of course, the ones we're cutting down for lumber. And that we do in a sustainable fashion. So my family takes pride in the fact that its forest is not cut at sustainable yield, and is now more biodiverse, and has more, effectively we are capturing carbon, because we have more trees and fewer trees, and the trees are growing, and we're harvesting less than we actually take in, a way that we can actually offset some of the carbon used by the farm. So, but all that just needs to continue. It needs to be doubled down by other people. There is no quick, easy answer. Just take action now across a whole range of fronts. So now, I'm sorry if someone's looking for a silver bullet. They do not exist for so complex and important an issue. Other questions?
So we have a question asking, when do you think the market will start destabilizing for a possible crash?
The stock market, I presume,
yes, is
referring to. The stock market is quite different from the housing market. The stock market traditionally is much more volatile. It can leap up and down by very large amounts. Because the prices are relatively high, and because some of the prices are driven by, as I said, unwise short-term decision makers. What I can certainly say is it is going to be, and I'm sorry if this sounds like a waffle, but I'm not going to mix stuff up. It is going to be unpredictably volatile. So, if I could give you the timing, I would. Well, after I'd taken my own stock position to profit insanely from the information. I can't tell you that. But I can tell you to be cautious. I can tell you, the old virtues work. It's really so boring that we have to say the old virtues work. You're engineers. You should know that, we don't repeal the law of gravity. Like, things you got to do are the same. And one of the things is that everyone tells you, and you should do it, you just don't want to do it. I've known more than one engineer who bitches about the law of gravity because it's slowing down the design they want to make. Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that, but you got to live with the world you're in. And the advice for investment is very clear. Trying to get timing so you can profit from the timing is almost impossible. So do what you're supposed to do, which is diversify your risks, to make sure you have a wide variety of things. Wide variety of investment categories, some debt, some equity. And yes, the truth is, a small amount, I'm looking at someone now, of Bitcoin would be reasonable, because it's diversified risk. Other questions?
All right, we have time for one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question is, it sounds like you agree there's a very large opportunity for technology. How does this opportunity compare to decades past? Well,
I'd actually change that to say, yes, I see huge opportunities for technology, but I would actually say I see a urgent, growing, critical need for strategic innovations, technical innovations to be created across a wide range of circumstances, from simple things, assuring that the planet has clean water, that it has an adequate and nutritious food supply, Technology also is needed to make sure we rein in the dark web, which is a haven for criminals of every disgusting kind who are prepared to destabilize economic activity and peddle child pornography and traffic in human beings. Really, we need technology to address that, because at the moment they do it with impunity, and that's got to come to an end. There are, as Mary mentioned earlier, enormous opportunities in healthcare and advancements in biological science, which also needs engineering expertise as well. So in my mind, there are huge opportunities. With respect to how has it changed over time, I think the needs for technology have become more urgent. I see that as changing over time. I see a greater appreciation in society of the need to do innovation, which is, of course, another way to look at technological innovation. It is interesting for me to notice over the, 40 years that I've been in the classroom, to watch major corporations virtually all major corporations have innovation units. Now, sometimes they're innovation only in name, but rhetoric changes before reality changes. So at least companies now understand that they better innovate or that they cannot survive in the marketplace. Now, that's a change. And that's, for me, a very positive harbinger, because we can't at one hand tell the graduates of the University of Waterloo, go forth and be innovators, when all of their employers do not want them to do that. That would hardly be useful. Again, I wish us all success in dealing with these extraordinary times. You know, when I was young, I actually thought to myself, I hope I live in interesting times. I had not heard the aphorism about it. Young Larry thought that. Now, I do with less interesting times, to tell you the truth. Wish us all success.